Hello there everyone, welcome to a Second Thoughts overview of Vlad von Carstein of the Vampire Counts. So I played the initial turns, getting a feel of how the faction plays out. Now these are my conclusions, and in the end I showcase the army compositions that I will try out for fun. This is not an in-depth guide, but has all that you need to engage in this campaign. Let's play then with Vlad von Carstein. For our short victory condition, we need to control the provinces of Northern Sylvania and Southern Sylvania, basically just the neighboring provinces to your starting settlement, so nothing too difficult. And then we also need to control Altdorf, either directly or via allies or vassals. You also need to occupy, loot, raise or sack 30 different settlements. Now, pretty much a remarkable easy victory condition, great to give you a taste of the faction and to see if you want to pursue it any further. I would always recommend Vlad as the first Vampire Counts campaign that you do. It's definitely one of the best experiences. Achieving this short victory will give you plus 15% casualty replenishment rate, which is also excellent to ensure that your armies are quickly back to full strength to continue the conquests. Now, long victory requires you to achieve the short victory to occupy, loot, raise or sack 75 different settlements and basically destroy Reichland and conquer all of the provinces of the empire located here. So that's pretty straightforward as well. It's honestly one of the easiest long victory campaigns there are, so it's also a good way to get to a better view of the Vampire Counts as a whole, and then you can decide if you wish to continue further into domination, for instance. Achieving this long victory will give you plus 35 Winds of Magic Power reserve capacity, which is also excellent because they do rely a lot on magic throughout the game, so this just makes sure that you can continue to domination or other objectives in a much better position. Now, Vlad has the Dark Kiss. They start with one Blood Kiss. He has access to a unique building in Castle Drakenhof, more on that later. Campaign movement range plus 10% to all armies. This one is excellent. More movement is always really good. And then he starts with Isabella von Carstein as a legendary hero. I'll speak about her in just a few moments. Now, overall good, decent buffs. I wish it had a little bit more uniqueness to them, maybe some mechanics or something like that, but having Isabella von Carstein as a hero, it was already a very good addition to the campaign overall. Climates is where it's a little bit average, let's say. Let's call it average, because there are too many places there are yellow in this case, or unpleasant or uninhabitable places. So basically that's a big issue with the Vampire Counts. It's not an easy faction to play for domination, but by all means, if you do so, try to get a base of operations. The Empire lands are always good to try and get those. Be wary of going to the mountains, that sort of idea. Okay. So your starting province is a 3-settlement province, and you have another 3-settlement province to conquer right from the start. This ensures that you have quite a solid base of both recruitment and income, being one of the quite better starting locations overall in the game. Now, although you are surrounded technically, you know, the dwarves aren't really friendly towards you, other vampires of course here are not, the empires are iffy. Although you're surrounded, Castle Drakenhof itself, it's quite defensible, and the raised dead mechanic helps ensure that you get some defense should you be attacked from another front. So still, I recommend that you keep an eye on any possible threats until you can expand, for instance, into the mountains. Typical expansion is thus to conquer this nearby area, of course, and then proceeding against Draika over there, or even into the Empire lands. You can also go into the mountains, but be wary of the mountains because, of course, they are unpleasant. There's a lot of mines there, so it's a bit of what risk and reward you can get from that. So be wary how you approach the expansion there. In terms of diplomacy, you're part of the evil tide, but there are some interesting possibilities here. So typical enemies will be the Empire and the Dwarves, with greenskins and ogres as well as Skaven being possible allies. But the other thing around can happen as well, where you're going to be at war with greenskins and the Dwarves actually like you because of that sort of idea. Should be noted that, for instance, Kislev does not have nearly any aversion towards you, neither has Cathay. So this is interesting to try in a given setting. So the outposts that I'm going to give you are kind of based around those. So ogres always can, you know, get along with you. Basically, you can get good relations with them. So getting some of their missile units, of course, would be excellent. Same thing for the greenskins, and also some of their black orcs, if you can manage, of course, if you go to that route. And of course, if you choose to go with Cathay, it will always be excellent to get some of their infantry or some of their missile units, particularly. So yeah, it's always a nice idea here with Vlad, that you can also get, you know, good relations with good Tide factions and bad Tide factions. So yeah, it's one of the best ideas that I would go for replay value in terms of Vlad. So specifically to the faction, the relationship between Vlad and Isabella gives them plenty of bonuses to the army they're fighting with. So in essence, you do get a battle healing cap when in more 50% when an army with Isabella von Carstein, which is always excellent. You do get to heal much better your units and yourself, which is really cool. And then they complement each other in a different way. Vlad gives every single unit Vanguard deployment, and then Isabella gets a lot of buffs to units that will benefit greatly from that Vanguard. So they can go into a different time. I'll put some army compositions later on. So they can go into Falbats, Direwolves, up until Vargeists, Vargovs, and Terrorgeist types of units. So it allows a variety of possible combinations, which also adds to the replay value of this faction, of course. Now, Raise the Dead is your main sort of idea for recruitment. You fight battles, then you stand on top of a battlefield where lots of casualties have fallen, or stuff like this, where there's a lot of units to be raised for the dead. So you just search for those icons to ensure that you get, you know, a little bit better units. Most people actually don't even build up anything in terms of recruitment, because you can recruit certainly a lot of units just with the Raise the Dead mechanic. Blood Kisses, here we have them. You gain them by killing faction leaders in battle, vassalizing factions, or just by having those in your faction, or characters assassinated, which is really cool. And then you get the Bloodlines. Bloodlines are not just about getting one specific lord from each of these. They are all rather unique, you know, so all Blood Dragons, all Von Carstein, and all Lyman share a little bit the common tech tree, the common skill tree, so that's excellent. But the bloodlines themselves give you specific buffs. You know, as you're awakening them, these buffs will remain throughout your campaign. So it's more about which ones you want to obtain first. For instance, I wanted to obtain research rate for this faction better for me to use in the beginning, but I could have gone with casualty replenishment rate, or I could have gone with character experience gain if I wanted to go for a vampire stack, for instance, that sort of idea. So it allows you a little bit of flexibility in what you want for the campaign. Just make sure that you keep that you take a little bit of time analyzing this so that you can have an idea later on. Now, you require corruption so that you don't take attrition. Let me show you just the vampiric corruption. This implies that whenever you're expanding, make sure that you lead with some heroes if it's truly difficult, or just ensure that you have tons of corruption spreading out so that you can at least benefit from that. Otherwise, you'll suffer from some vampiric attrition, the opposite, some attrition, because there's no vampiric corruption. So yeah, always try to spread up your corruption. There's some buildings that will do that, which is always excellent, of course. I couldn't find it. I think no, it's not this one, it's the other building. Let me show you. Well, I'll show you in the buildings department later. But yeah, it's always a good one. Now, finally, if you lose entire units in battle, there's a Dead Rise Again mechanic that can bring back units to life. So this allows you to avoid having to recruit more troops, and when playing against the vampires, it's one of the most annoying mechanics, because they can just, you know, you can just lose a battle, raise a bunch of dead units, and then suddenly you're back to full, and you can just finish off whatever enemy you had. So overall, not a lot of mechanics, but they're all very important, and they play out really nicely with the faction. So in terms of edicts, you have a control and corruption edict. Remember that corruption is always essential, so don't neglect this one. Income from all buildings. You also have recruit rank and local recruitment capacity. This is the more negligible one, simply because of how the raise the dead mechanic works. If it should have really just more recruitment capacity and more recruit rank to be viable, in my opinion, but well, I digress. And then we have growth and less construction cost for all buildings. Pretty much you'll go around the growth or the public order if you need, especially in higher difficulties, or the income from all buildings. They're kind of a decent, efficient bunch, although nothing too fancy, I would say. I would change them to get more variety. In terms of your army stances, so channeling takes away 10% movement range, it gives you winds of magic, but it also is the one that enables replenishment in foreign territory. Raid is the one that gives you immunity to attrition and of course income, and it costs 50%. So you don't have an encamp stance. That's a big problem because that implies that you can't be immune to the attrition and at the same time replenishing. So replenishment in foreign territory is awful. It's really difficult. Then we have ambush for 25% move and campaign movement range plus 50% with the march. All the negatives there, nothing to see here. So, in terms of buildings, Castle Drakenhof has 3 special buildings. So, you do have the Mausoleum of the Mad Count. This is the special building for Vlad. It unlocks the vampires, which are a tier 4 hero that are unlocked at tier 1. And it gives you hero capacity, of course hero recruit rank, and much less recruitment cost for vampires. This is why it is so recurrent that people try to get a vampire focused stack with Vlad and Isabella. It's definitely one possibility that you may have. I don't go for it typically because I like to use different units, but it's up to you guys. Just if you wish, by all means, you have Legend of Total War and others doing all those stacks. By all means, check those out. You don't need, certainly if you're here, you don't need me to tell you who they are. Now, we also have the von Carstein Court Hall, giving you faction-wide control. It's always decent, especially in higher difficulties discounts. Vampire Corruption, faction-wide is always excellent, so as soon as you get this, you'll start to see the effects. Lord Recruit Rank and Hero Recruit Rank for vampires again, so +2 and +3 here. You can imagine how much it starts developing, of course. And then you have a gold mine. Now, I always include the resource as special buildings because definitely they are, and especially these. This really helps getting you the initial income that you need for your expansion. Now, in terms of military buildings, you need 7. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for full military. With 5 of which that you absolutely need to build in at the capital. So that means you have 2 that you can build in minor settlements. As you can see there, that's what I'm building, just to ensure that you can do that. You no longer require the armory, by the way, as a secondary building for other units, which is great. Typically, this was a big problem previously with the vampire counts that now has been solved. Now, tier 3 units are fairly decent. You can't build an army with them that easily. Okay, you still have Grave Gods, you still have Vargeists and Morgons, you still can do an army with that, but it's the tier 4 and 5 units that really give you the great composition, especially Blood Knights, especially the Mortis Engine, especially the Terrorgeists, you know, all of these combined with the tier 3 units to give you a great army, actually. Now, growth is a rather weak. I'll explain. It's very difficult to grow. You do have a building, but it gives just a little bit of growth for a tremendous amount of gold that you need to invest on it. Then you still have the edict to grow, but yeah, it's still very difficult. But still, infrastructure, it gives you growth, hero recruit capacity, and local recruitment capacity. You also have income and control. Don't neglect this. It's quite a lot of income, actually, and it advances really well. It doubles. And then you have vampiric corruption, also in adjacent provinces. This is the building that will allow you to ensure that corruption just spreads out nicely. Of course, it causes all sorts of problems to the enemy if they are not immune to vampiric corruption, and of course benefits your faction as well. It's rather a bland selection, but it's also good sometimes to have some clear choices. You don't have to think too much about the choices that you're going to do in terms of buildings. Now, In terms of research, also really useful. It's now very useful. It's mostly divided into bonuses for the infantry units, including, you know, a very nice buffs for zombies as well, and for the recruitment. That's always nice. I'd rather go with more, you know, different units such as the grave guards and stuff, just to see the more elite units, but it's up to you. Now there's also some nice buffs, including barriers for Cairn wraiths and Morgans and hex wraiths, which actually makes them really good units. I really like that. So most of this is based on the ethereal units and the crypt ghouls and horrors, and this one that I started doing, it's more because I wanted to see how they will go with dire wolves initially and fell bats, so just to see if I could make them viable in the campaign, and so far so good actually. And this is more the part of the campaign that goes for, you know, more growth, always important, more income, you see, so more campaign faction stuff, and still some bonuses for some blood knights and more of the elite units that you will have. So overall it's a very good, even though it's so small, it's a very good technology tree. I advise you that you study it a little bit so that you can, you know, predict what you're going to need during the campaign. So as always, in terms of skill lines, you have your legendary lord or specific lord skills, the yellow line or melee. In this case of the vampire accounts, you always have some form of magic as well, so you always have to spend a lot. That's the trickiest part of the vampires, I would say. Then the red line, of course, and or army, and the blue line or campaign. Starting with Vlad, basically he has good campaign buffs overall and battle specific ones that help out his abilities in battle, so that's really cool. And then he can benefit with Isabella, because Isabella has some buffs for the army in specific, which I really like. In the blue line, jumping on here, it allows quick replenish and reduced upkeep right from the start, and I don't advise really going too much over here, especially because you do have only 50 skill points to address. So unless you go for the Immortal horror here, I wouldn't concentrate too much. In terms of the red line, has good combinations. It's easy to synergize, especially because most of the time you have the elite troops combined with the low quality troops, so you can benefit from these stats all through the game if you manage to predict them pretty well. And then you have, you know, most of the bosses are here, most of the cavalry are here, so you can always predict what you're gonna use and benefit from that later on. I always like when this happens. Heroes are also some of the best in the game, actually. Nearly every single hero is really good. You do have the Necromancer, which is also one of the most basic. You can get these guys by the 30 of them very easily by the late game. They do replenish troops as well, and they boost income, in addition to, of course, being a very supportive hero, so they always are casters, and they can always, for the most part, use as healers. The Banshee, for instance, is a good one to increase mobility, which you can further with von Carstein, that he also gets plus 10%, so you can see how much you can actually move. Then you have the White King. Both of these are good melee heroes, by the way, but of course you also have the vampires, which are one of the best hybrids, I would say. They can fight well in melee, they have good spells, you can have access to the death or the shadows, which is always good. Shadows is currently one of the most reliable choices in terms of lores of magic. So yeah, and they also replenish, so you can see that you have good choices in terms of heroes. And especially for Vlad, he can get everything by tier 3, because he can get Necromancers here, White Kings here, Banshees here, and the Vampires here. So yeah, you can see how good that is in terms of lords, in terms of heroes. So here are the red line skills for the vampire accounts. They have a rather short roster, by the way, and no missile units whatsoever. Now it's worth noting, like I stated before, they're mostly divided into categories. All infantry here, nearly all cavalry here except the hex wraiths, but all ethereal units so far here. The Morgul's kind of count of that. All monsters here, so that sort of idea. Now Vlad and Isabella's, they have some unique combos here. It allows you to have plenty of variety in the compositions. They're mostly known for the ability to get a vampire hero doom stack, really, based on the melee attack and melee defense for embedded vampire heroes from Isabella, which by all means you can go for. Now, the following compositions all focus on the abilities and skills given. And remember, Vlad gives Vanguard to everyone. So, I'm going to go with some compositions, even with the Dire Wolves and Fell Bats, because they do have the Hungers, and Wayfarer, and Effect Discourage. So they have so many good stuff, especially with Isabella on the army, that, yeah, let's see what happens. So, you can definitely use, remember, all of these units vanguarding. You know, you can put the Fellbats up against any artillery units or any range units, which they can definitely hit and wreck. You can use the Direwolves as well. The Crypt Horrors actually benefit from having the same red line skills as line of the Vargheists, of the Varghulfs, of the Terrorgeists. So this sort of army, you know, for the late game, also you can see how much it doesn't cost in terms of red line skills, so you can benefit from all those buffs and have a little bit more joy into it. That's the sort of idea that I want, to have a little bit of a different playstyle with them. Nothing wrong with getting them, you know, some handgunners and missile units if you wish, or you can replace these guys with better units from the outposts, by the way. But this is sort of an early composition that you can have. Note that everything here is tier 3 or below. By the way, only the Vargas are actually tier 3, because these guys are tier 2. So you can see that you can catch up really fast for those units as well. And then nothing wrong, of course, with using a more standard, Graveguard infantry with some knights to support and some terror guys there, some flyers. I always like to use them. By all means, you can have the typical doom stack with vampires, but for the most part, all that I advise is to get at least another one, more focused as a melee defender, perhaps for Vlad or for Isabella, while Vlad and Isabella just, you know, they synergize so well, they are a doom stack of their own. Now, in terms of the other specific examples, so the Bloodline Lords, all of them have specific stuff that they buff, so by all means you can give them some interesting units. This is a great example of an army that you can use just to support anything else on a lengthy siege. Can you imagine your reinforcing army? It's just flyers. They will immediately reinforce your forces, so you'll effectively be fighting off much better in that regard. And for instance, with the Crypticals, then it becomes the different parts. So they have advantages for Crypticals and Crypt Horrors, so you can use this as sort of an army without an issue, by the way. And then you do have these other lords. They don't have any specific buffs for the units, but by all means, you know, having something like a completely ethereal army, unless you're going against something that has completely all magic attacks, such as Tzeentch, for instance. Don't go against Tzeentch with this, but by all means you can have a lot of fun just watching all those ethereal units fight, and you can still have quite some decent combinations. Of course, not necessarily always these, but you can have different unique combinations, of course. This is the beauty, I think, of the Vampire Counts roster. Even though it's small, you can have a lot of different comps. And this is more of the basic. So because you do have some upkeep for Graveguards and Blood Knights reduction, so by all means, having these, you can imagine how cheap this army actually ends up being. And using them with Mortis engines, nothing here will die, definitely, with 3 Mortis engines there. Some Black Coaches, just why not, just to enjoy those. And then you can have, instead of those, just the same type of idea with some flyers, of course. So overall, great capability of variety if you're just checking in the different combinations between the lords and the skill lines, let alone with different heroes and different abilities, different skills, etc., or different spells, for instance, etc. So in final conclusions, Vlad is probably the most straight up Vampire Counts campaign. You go against the Empire, you go against the Dwarves, it's kind of like in Warhammer 1. And Isabella's presence, as you've seen, gives them some uniqueness. You'll enjoy the power couple in battle, for certain, against nearly any foe. You can have different army compositions, a doom stack, whatever you wish. The key point with this campaign is how the long campaign victory is quite tailored to Vlad. So a quick, long campaign, while taking advantage of the rush factor from Vlad's Vanguard deployment, is quite interesting to play out. So your army consists typically of good infantry, great cavalry, great flying units, good chariots, no missile units whatsoever, and he does rely a bit on magic early on. A little bit less, dare I say, with Vlad because of his uniqueness. Replenishment is good, but climate will of course cause issues. Vlad suffers a little bit as well because of his proximity with the mountains, just giving him, hospitable, standard climate, suitable climate, that's the word, for the mountains would do such a great advantage for Vlad and Isabella. I would love that. So I believe, yes, now it's time to play with Vlad as your lord and Isabella as your hero companion.